I was doing everything right in terms of trying to get out of tension. I was stretching. I was doing my daily yoga practice. I was moving mindfully. And I was teaching others to do the same. And I'd been stretching literally all my life. But it wasn't changing anything. So if that sounds familiar to you, it could be that you're using the wrong process. Stretching doesn't actually address what's going on with tight muscles. And in this video, I'm going to tell you about what I discovered in my journey with this. Hi, I'm Claudine. Nice to meet you. Welcome if you're new here. So I've been practicing and teaching yoga for many years, done lots of wonderful practices, alignment-based practices, restorative practices, hip opening, all the psoas work, all of that stuff. And yes, I had lots of temporary relief over the course of time. But what I discovered was that even despite all of that, pain would still be there. It felt like I still had some injury or some issue going on in my hip. So I thought to myself, well, if I'm doing all of this, if I'm stretching and I'm moving every day, I should feel better. I felt frustrated. I even felt ashamed because it felt like my body was a little bit broken. And as a teacher, I was kind of like, well, this doesn't quite feel right. My flexibility did improve, and so did my mobility to some degree. I could touch my toes quite happily. I could catch my feet behind my head in certain positions and stand on my head for 10 minutes. All of those things were open to me, but I still had pain and tension. And it felt like sometimes that I was fighting against myself. I knew I wasn't resolving anything, but I didn't know what else to do. It wasn't like I had an alternative. It was just kind of like, well, why isn't this working? So what I later found out was that whilst everyone tells us to stretch, stretching doesn't re-educate how the brain uses your body, how it uses your muscles. And the brain is in control of your muscles. So if you don't speak to the brain, which you don't when you're stretching, then you're not going to change anything at that level. And what happens is the body just returns to its familiar patterns as soon as that stretch is finished. And then, a little while later, of course, you're back to square one and you feel tight again. Forcing a stretch, which in retrospect is what I realised I was doing a lot of the time, overriding what my nervous system was actually wanting me to do. I was going into the mechanism of the stretch reflex, which is simply to tighten muscles up in response to taking them beyond their natural length. Now, there are lots of ways you can overcome the stretch reflex, and of course I was brilliant at doing all of that. But nevertheless, what really happened was this being in this constant state of overriding the time. And that was why my body was staying stiff. Now, when I learned about clinical somatics, what I learned was that the brain, in its wisdom of protecting us and adapting to situations in life, usually due to stress, it was holding muscles tighter. And that created sensory motor amnesia. Sensory, as in being able to sense, motor meaning movement, and amnesia, so a disconnect between what I can actually sense and feel in my body and where the brain's actually holding me. And why that's important is because understanding that the brain actually loses voluntary control over certain muscles means that the process to fix that is an educational process. You need to actually re-educate those muscles, not just stretch them. What you're really doing when you stretch is forcing. You're pulling on a muscle to try and lengthen it. What I'm saying is if your muscles are already tight, you're already stuck in a habitual pattern, it's actually not going to help you change that habit, that pattern. So what would you do instead? Does it mean you have to give up all of those nice practices that feel so good in the moment? I don't think so. What I did, and I backed off on a lot of those practices because I wanted to relearn and I wanted to change my habits and my patterns. And that was to use the technique of pandiculation, which is simply to contract and release the muscle with awareness. You can't force your way out of a protective reflex, right? The muscles are just tight. But you can retrain it. You can, instead of forcing it, you can use curiosity. You can connect to what you're actually doing and learn to properly sense and feel your body and respond to that in a very particular way. That's what I did. My brain started to respond and change. And yes, I felt immediate relief, but what I also felt was that there was an actual shift, a deeper shift, where I started to understand and be able to feel the habits that I developed. And instead of forcing past them now, I was honouring them in everything that I did. Now, that took some time to get used to that because it was a relearning process. It didn't happen overnight. But gradually, I learned how to let go of those muscles that previously I had no contact with. I had no connection to them. So this reflecting on your own body and slowing down, learning to sense more, learning to release muscles rather than stretch them, you get into this conversation with your nervous system that becomes not about correcting something, but about understanding something and retraining it. So if you've ever had that feeling yourself in your own body that, yeah, you've been doing lots of stretching and it's giving you the temporary relief, but something still doesn't quite feel integrated, what I'd suggest you do, and you can do this at any time that you move next, is simply to, instead of pulling into a stretch, explore how to come out of it. And instead of going straight into a stretch, you can contract first very gently and then release into it. So there's lots of ways you can play around with it. But essentially what you have to do is you have to slow down and be more mindful and see if that changes how you feel in your body. So if that opened up something new to you, then please do follow along for more like this. I'll be showing some more about these habitual patterns, what I experienced in my own body, and how this chronic holding is actually so prevalent, and I see it with most of the people that I teach. And so this is a very valuable tool that you can learn. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.